breaking news, Lula has met with Maduro from Venezuela. For those who are not aware, this is huge news. This is actually very significant. It's not likely that something like this would have happened a couple of years ago. But what was that meeting about, and what does this mean for the future of South America? I want to go to this clip here from OWN. They are discussing this meeting and also the fact that Lula is calling out the U.S. government for putting sanctions on Venezuela. Listen to this.
Massive paradigm shifts are afoot in South American politics. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro is visiting Brazil for the first time since he was banned by the former far-right president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, in 2019. President Lula da Silva of Brazil urged Maduro to build a new narrative. The new bridges with Brazil enable a new acceptability for the thus far isolated leader. Maduro was received by the fellow leftist Brazilian leader, Lula da Silva, ahead of a summit of Latin American leader in Brasilia. This is Venezuela's president's first visit to Brazil after a nearly 4-year period of hostility.
So this is one of the reasons why this meeting is so significant, because he hasn't been to Brazil in, they said, four years. Now, let's keep it real. Obviously, U.S. leaders are not happy that this meeting took place. And there are other leaders in the West that are also not happy that this alliance is happening here. Just the fact that Lula is simply meeting with Maduro, and we'll get into the reasons about that as well. But you can bet the Biden administration is not happy that this went down. You can bet.
During bilateral talks, Maduro said a new era is opening up between the two countries and that the two nations must be united from now on and always.
So that piece was important, that the two nations must be united, this part. I'll put captions up actually, because they have a lot of spacing in between there. When they're doing their commentary, they have a lot of gaps in between. Here we go.
Must be united from now on and always.
There you go.
Se abre una nueva época en las relaciones entre nuestros países, entre nuestros pueblos. Y en esa nueva época debe corresponder entonces la construcción de un nuevo mapa de cooperación, de trabajo conjunto, que abarque todas las áreas.
All right, let me read what he's saying. Go back here just a little bit so you can understand what's... Okay, here we go.
Se abre una nueva época en las relaciones.
A new era is opening up in the relations between our countries, between our peoples, and this new...
Entre nuestros países, entre nuestros pueblos. Y en esa nueva época debe corresponder entonces la...
And this new era must include the construction of a new map of cooperation, of joint work that encompasses...
Construcción de un nuevo mapa de cooperación, de trabajo conjunto, que abarque todas las áreas.
That encompasses all areas. So here you have Lula and Maduro reaching some type of partnership or alliance, so to speak. Yeah, buddy. I told you it's getting hot. It's getting hot in Brazil.
In a sign that ties between both the nations are solid, Lula da Silva called out the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela as, quote-unquote, extremely exaggerated. Lula's warm embrace of the Venezuelan president just ahead of the meeting drew a lot of pushback from some of the neighboring countries and also threatened the sense of unity that the Brazilian president was seeking.
Right. So Lula is saying that the sanctions that the U.S. government has on Venezuela are exaggerated and that they should end. Obviously, here you see that he's getting pushback for having this meeting with Maduro. Let's go on. Okay. They could work on their transitions a little bit. I mean, thank you guys for the news, but you can work on your transitions a little bit. Anywho, let's move on because I have an article I want to go to in reference to this as well. So this is coming from U.S. News. Maduro and Lula hit out as U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. So let's get into this. And I want you guys to think about what this could mean for the future of BRICS as well. I want to make this bigger. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and Brazilian leader Lula on Sunday assailed U.S. sanctions against Venezuela, and Maduro said he hopes a regional South American summit in Brazil will call for their removal. Lula called the U.S. sanctions extremely exaggerated and criticized the U.S. for denying the legitimacy of fellow leftist Maduro, who is considered by Washington an authoritarian leader who has not allowed free elections. Maduro was on his first visit to Brazil since 2015, taking advantage of warmer relations before 11 South American presidents met in Brazil on Tuesday. We're going to get into that as well. The Venezuelan president also said his country wants to be part of the BRICS group of leading emerging nations, which Lula said he would personally favor. So, now I told you there were other countries that wanted to join BRICS. Now you have Maduro himself, who many in the West have feared, saying that he also wants to join BRICS. How do you think that would go? Do you think that the U.S. government would see BRICS as even more of a threat than they do now if Venezuela joined BRICS? Brazil's former hard-right president, Bolsonaro, had banned Maduro from entering Brazil when he took office in 2019, a measure that Lula lifted when he returned to power this year. We are living in a historic moment. It's hard to believe so many years went by with no dialogue with a neighbor with whom we share the Amazon region. That's coming from Lula. Among the issues on their agenda was a large debt Venezuela has run up with Brazil's National Development Bank, Brazilian officials have said. Brazilian Finance Minister Fernando was due to meet with Maduro and Lula, and the president of state-run oil company Petrobras, Jean-Paul Prates. Lula said he argued with the United States and fellow social democrats over Maduro's legitimacy and the 900 sanctions Venezuela faces. I think it is really absurd that they deny that Maduro is the president of Venezuela. The South American presidents, all except Peru, will discuss the launch of a cooperation bloc in place of the defunct UNASUR, which was created in 2008 during the previous presidency of Lula, with the leftist leaders at the time of Venezuela and Argentina, Hugo Chavez and Cristina Kirchner, respectively. The organization floundered, with several South American countries elected right-wing governments, creating diplomatic fixtures on the continent. The world is changing. We've talked about BRICS. We've talked about China and Brazil trying to move away from the US dollar. And this is going to actually transfer over into the Richard Wolff story. This is all connected. But the world that we have known economically, globally, things are starting to change. And we're starting to see a shift in the power structure and the different dynamics. We are seeing other countries rise up and say that they want to be at the world stage and they don't really want to follow the lead of the US government anymore. Is there a point when it comes to BRICS where there are certain leaders or certain countries where there should be a hard red line, where there should be a hard no? Is Venezuela one of those countries that should not be allowed to join BRICS? And if that's the case, is there any type of line? Now, I want to show you something here from Human Rights Watch, because they bring up interesting points, but there's one crucial piece that they leave out in reference to Venezuela and this meeting that Lula had. It says Brazil's Lula misses crucial chance to uphold rights in Venezuela. So pay attention. This is Human Rights Watch. So that's what they're going to focus on, but it's important to see what they actually leave out. That's the part I think that really got me. I don't know if this can get any bigger. Okay, there we go. After meeting with Nicolas Maduro this week, Brazil's President Lula implied that democracy is thriving in Venezuela and called for, no, this is way too small. I guess it's just their text. Yeah, it's just, okay, that's better. Okay, where was I? Did I lose where I was? Okay. After meeting with Maduro this week, Brazil's President Lula implied that democracy is thriving in Venezuela and called the undermining of diplomatic institutions there a constructed narrative. As someone who recently survived efforts to overthrow Brazil's democracy, it was frustrating to see him fawning over Venezuela's repressive ruler. It is no secret that the Maduro government had seized control of Venezuela's legislature and subordinated the judiciary. Election monitors have documented conditions undermining the fairness and transparency of recent elections. There have been 15,700 politically motivated arrests since 2014, with more than 280 political detainees being held now. Human Rights Watch and Venezuelan organizations have documented crackdowns on protesters, torture of detainees, and prosecutions of civilians in military courts. The International Criminal Court prosecutor has opened an investigation into such crimes. President Lula likely knows all of this. Maduro's government has also spurred one of the largest migration crises in the world. 7.2 million Venezuelans have fled since 2014, close to 6 million to other Latin American and Caribbean countries, including Brazil. The United Nations has reported that undernourishment in Venezuela is highest in the region, affecting 6.5 million people. Human Rights Watch has documented the collapse of Venezuela's health system. Now, they do a good job of mentioning some of the issues that are happening in Venezuela, which are considered to be human rights issues. But what they do not do in this article, they don't link it back to the bigger picture, and that is the U.S. government. Not once in this article. What is the U.S. government's role in reference to Venezuela? When they mention that this is a migration crisis that goes all the way back to 2014, well, that was under Obama's administration, right? Starting under a Democrat president. So if you're going to point out that they have a migration crisis, and you point out the crimes that are happening there, and you also mention how the people are being treated there, but you conveniently leave out the fact that the U.S. government has had a hand in this, I see that as a problem. Why are people, that's right, Desert Manta, sanctions will do that to a country. That's right. Why are people in this situation to begin with? And this is not to sugarcoat Maduro. But why are these things happening? Other than the fact that they had Maduro as a leader, why else are these things happening? Who supplied the arms to people in Venezuela? Where'd all the weapons come from? How can they not mention it? Let's go on. Various world leaders have met with President Maduro in recent months and positioned themselves to play a mediating role in any negotiations towards the restoration of democracy. But by parroting the Maduro government talking points, President Lula aligned himself with Maduro's authoritarian allies and missed a chance to help lead Venezuela out of a massive humanitarian and human rights crisis. If I remember correctly in the previous video, Lula said they need to end the sanctions on Venezuela. So we want to talk about the humanitarian crisis and to lead them out of that. The first step would be to end the sanctions on Venezuela, which Lula did mention. At this week's meeting in Brazil, Presidents Lecalpu of Uruguay and Gabriel Boric of Chile, leaders from opposite ideological ends took aim at Lula's comments. President Boric said the suffering of the Venezuelans was a reality, not a construct, and that he had seen it in his eyes of the hundreds of thousands taking refuge in Chile. President Lula should pursue every chance to restore the leadership his ill-considered comments undermined and fulfill his promise to lead on human rights worldwide. The Venezuelan emergency and the migration crisis it has generated will continue to be an important topic wherever South American leaders meet. President Lula should show support to the Venezuelan people, the political prisoners, the threatened journalists, the sick and hungry, the migrants and refugees, and seize every opportunity to reframe his stance on Venezuela. So this is not to say these examples that they're mentioning in this article are false. This is not to say that. But I feel like they don't link it back to the root cause. Not once do they even mention the U.S. government. Again, this is Human Rights Watch. So we have to, when we talk about this particular issue, we have to bring that back up. We have to link it back to that. Now, to go off of what they said in that article about this meeting with other leaders in South America, yes, 12 leaders in South America met all in one place for the first time in 9 years. Is this a sign of what is to come? Let's get into it.
It's been a long time coming, 9 years since leaders of South America's 12 countries gathered face to face. Host President Lula da Silva described it as an overdue and urgent encounter to build a regional bloc that can demonstrate strength through unity.
Together we have a $4 trillion GDP. Together we are the fifth global economy. We have 450 million consumers and the biggest and most diversified energy potential in the world.
Brazil's president outlined 15 initiatives for discussion behind closed doors, including highway, energy, and trade integration, and a single South American currency for continental commerce. Brazil favors...
That piece right there is very important, you guys. The possibility of South American commerce. Let's go back a little bit.
And most diversified energy potential in the world.
Brazil's president outlined 15 initiatives for discussion behind closed doors, including highway, energy, and trade integration, and a single South American currency for continental commerce.
A single South American currency for continental commerce. Does everybody see what's happening? Lula is making moves. These leaders are not, they're doing their own thing. They're doing their own thing. And I like to talk about this because I want people to realize we have grown up in this country with I mean, ever since I was a kid, the United States was the wealthiest country in the world, right? We are going into a time where things are going to change. And it's already starting with BRICS, etc. Who knows? Will these other countries in South America, will they join BRICS as well? Could you imagine South America having its own currency? Now, why is this important other than the effect that it could have on the US dollar? It's important because one of the things that I explained on this show before is that when we talk about exploitation of the workers, we can't just think about exploitation of the workers in the US. We have to think about it on a global level. And when you think about it globally, and you look at some of these countries that do have these social, democracies where everybody has health care, where everybody gets like a month off vacation, etc. While there may not necessarily be exploitation happening to their people in their country, usually there is exploitation happening somewhere else, and it usually happens in the global South. So if South America moves forward in having their own currency, that won't just have an impact on the US dollar. Think about how all these other countries that have been using workers for child labor, etc., in these countries in the global South, think about how that is going to affect everybody else that has been depending on the US dollar. Think about it. And it's just a first step. From this point, there could be implications with trade. Maybe they may start changing trade agreement. We don't know. We don't know. So we have to pay attention to what's going on.
Brazil favors reactivating UNASUR, the South American bloc he helped create 15 years ago, but that most countries abandoned when the political pendulum in the region swung from left to right.
Most agreements in South America, most advances of big issues in South America, they are constantly on a stop-and-go movement, because when there's ideological alignment, there's willingness to advance. When there isn't ideological alignment, the advance becomes much slower.
The presence of Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro, whom many consider authoritarian, became divisive. Streaming his own speech on social media, Uruguay's president minced no words.
Not all of us here have the same definition of what is respect for institutions, for human rights, and for democracy.
President Lula is also under fire.
Yeah, so even though Lula was able to gather all the leaders together in one place, they all met, that doesn't mean that all of them agree with what Maduro has been up to. That doesn't mean they all agree with him being there. But they all did agree to sit at the table and have a discussion.
As the head of the region's largest economy, he is clearly trying to recover the role he played during his last presidency as South America's natural leader. Yet right now he is being strongly criticized, both here at home and abroad, for his unequivocal support of Nicolás Maduro. But in the end, there was consensus on the need not to exclude anyone and to focus on what they have in common. If they succeed in laying the groundwork for continental integration, the biggest challenge will be to create a bloc that can survive the test of time.
They decided to come together and focus on what they do have in common and work on those issues and put the other ones to the side. Does that sound familiar to you? Isn't that what we talk about sometimes in reference to organizing? People coming together for one common goal or two common goals. People coming together for an anti-war movement, even though they may disagree on other issues. They were able to do that and put the other issues to the side. People in the United States, for the most part, a lot of people here have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world. If you walk down the street and just walk up to a random person and say, hey, are you familiar with BRICS? How many people will know what you're referring to? Most people don't even know this is happening. Most people don't even know that there is this push to move away from the US dollar by China and Brazil. Most people don't even know. And that's the reality. But if you ask them things that are not as important, and this is the part that gets me, if you ask them things that are not as important, they can tell you who the most popular TikTok star is. They can tell you about drama that has happened between the housewives. They can tell you about drama that has happened between different celebrities. But most people right now have no idea what is happening in the rest of the world. And it's important that we pay attention. And when we get into this story next with Richard Wolff, you'll understand why it's important that we pay attention. This is the wake-up call to everybody. Big wake-up call. I'm going to go through some of the comments here. PB World said, I'd love to see Mexico join BRICS, USA's backyard. So that was mentioned at one point in time, but I never heard anything else from it. I read somewhere that they were interested, but nothing else after that. Thanks for the super chat, Roger. Economic sanctions. Mike says, Sabby, between the show and the call-in for like 3 hours last night, I don't know how you do it. Still great to see you doing the thing again. You're awesome. Oh, thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's funny. I used to work mad long hours, guys. Like it was no 40-hour work week for me, but yeah, I used to work mad long hours. I think I just got used to it. But Veronica, wow, common ground and no US in the room too. Yay. Things are happening. Zombie, a report I saw on the BBC, called it the so-called BRICS. The saltiness is palpable. People, it's funny. Vinta Cafe, most of my friends doesn't even know about the petrodollar and BRICS. You see what I mean? And Mike also says we're losing our place as a reserve currency. All empires end. This is true. Gamer says America is still the most propagandized country. That's 100% correct.